Yeah, that's good.
Good. Awesome.
Perfecto. Wow. So yeah, thanks for coming on the show, Brother Timothy Hogan. This is awesome, man.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Hmm. Yeah,
There's more.
I actually have one of your books on the four elements, and I was really just impressed by that. I came
Great.
about you just from your videos online and YouTube. I think you had one about alchemy and masonry that really struck me, and so then I got your book, and I don't know. I feel like you're probably one of the thought leaders in masonry today. I mean, you're very insightful, and I like the way you put things together and the way you do your research. And so I have a million questions.
Great.
This may be a
Well,
longer episode.
that's good. Well, thanks for getting the book,
Mm. Oh, my pleasure. I'm
by
sure
the
we'll
way,
get
and thanks
more
for
too.
the nice compliments.
Yeah. So, and since we might go a little longer, depending on the conversation, if you want to take a break at any point, to go use the bathroom or get a drink, we could just pause and, I'll edit that out. So that's fine too. Just let me know.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
we should be good. I got my coffee, and we should be good to go. So
Awesome. Awesome.
yeah.
So, I guess we'll start off because, you obviously know a lot more about yourself than I do. Yeah, I'd like to hear about your background, where you come from, what kind of led you into esoteric topics, the kind of your life journey in brief somehow. That would be
Sure.
awesome.
Yeah. Well, so my background was, in particular, I grew up in Colorado. My father was in politics my entire life,
Oh,
which
wow.
was interesting growing up. He was
Uh-huh.
a representative, and he was on Aurora City Council, and he became he was mayor. And
Hmm.
so, I kind of grew up in that, which is interesting. My mom was a school teacher, and I, at a very young age, they started sending me to a summer camp here in Colorado called Geneva Glen, and it was started in 1922. And in within this summer camp program is a what's called it's a knighthood program, and it's a mentor program for personal development that has a degree structure built into it. And it was found out much later, as I went through this several years, as I went through received several ranks, culminating in a Sir Knight rank within this
Hmm.
program, that my the founders of the camp and the people who helped set up the program were all Freemasons.
Hmm.
And so there was lots of Masonic language incorporated in it. There was Masonic ritual in it, and it was a precursor to Demolay. So most of the people who had set up the camp had come in from the Midwest, and yeah, did this degree system. So I went through that, and that kind of got me looking into Freemasonry. By the time I was excuse me just a second, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead, man.
Sorry about that. So
No worries.
that got me looking into Freemasonry. By the time I was 16, 17, and actually I went down to the local Scottish Rite, because wanted to see what it took to become a Freemason. Yeah, and right before I did, I was talking to my mom. I went over to
Mhm.
her house. I was in college. I was 18. I went over to my mom's house and to do laundry, and I said, Hey, do you know anything about Freemasonry?" And she's like, "Yeah, both your grandfathers are Freemasons." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, and your dad was was involved in demolay and everything else, and
Oh, wow.
I had no idea. And so
Wow.
I reached out to my grandfather, Hugh Warren, and I said, "Hey, I'm interested in masonry. I just found out you're a mason, and what is this?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, like we have a long family history of Freemasonry." And so he started talking with me about it. My great grandfather was General Joseph Warren, who was the first Grand Master of the forming United States. He died at the Battle of Bunker Hill, and he was, he initiated Paul Revere, and very, very involved, obviously. And then
You said this was your great great grandfather? Is
my
that right?
great grandfather, like seventh generations back.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And then my great grandfather was the grand James Bedden Warren was he was the grand lecturer for the Grand Lodge of Philadelphia. And he actually ended up moving here to Colorado at some point. My grandfather, Hugh Warren, he ended up moving to Colorado during after World War II. Or he was stationed at Lowry Air Force Base at the time here in Colorado, and I don't know, the rest is kind of history. So my grandfather said you had to wait till you're 21 to join, because back then you had to be 21 to join here in Colorado. And so he just gave me a copy of Morals and Dogma to read.
Well, there you go. There's some homework for you.
So yeah, I didn't understand any of it, I understood some, but it was so cryptic to me, but I wanted to understand it. So I read it, and I reread it, and I tried to understand it more, and then eventually I became a Mason. And I had some very good mentors, and my grandfather, Hugh Warren, was a great mentor. And then my other grandfather, Howard Hogan, he was real involved in Freemasonry in Nebraska. And and I found out that my great grandfather on my father's side had also donated a bunch of things to the Masonic Center in Hastings, Nebraska, including the pool tables there. He had bought them, and stuff. And so there's this whole world opened up to me that I didn't even know existed up until that point. So
wow.
Since that time, I was trying to study many of the things that in particular my grandfather Hugh Warren had talked with me about. And by the way, my middle name is Warren because that's my mother's maiden name. And
gotcha. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So, and then anyhow, from there, I started lecturing at lodges. And I remember the first Grand Lodge I ever lectured at was at the Grand Lodge in New Mexico. And I didn't have any books or anything back then, but people are always asking me, hey, do you have a book? Can I get a book?
So I can read more.
I didn't have any, so I was like, well, I guess I can write one. And so that was, and the main reason why I did it too is there was a real trend at the time. People were saying, oh, there's no secrets in Masonry. Right. It's just a fraternal body and blah blah blah. And I knew that was not true because of my experience and the things I learned. My grandfather Hugh Warren was a metallurgist at Denver University, so he started teaching me some of the alchemical connections. And apparently my great grandfather General Joseph Warren, he was also a physician during the Revolutionary War, and he was studying alchemy as well in connection with Masonry. And in fact, that's why he and Paul Revere started becoming so close because Paul Revere was, as you know, was also a silversmith. And so they were looking at, they were doing stuff with metallurgy, with alchemy, on top of everything. So, there's this whole history that most Masons were not aware of. And so I really felt like I needed to make people aware. So that was the main reason why I published the book, my first initial book, and then just kind of gone from there. So it's taken me all over the world.
How many books have you published now?
I have, I think 5 or 6 at this point. Right. I mean, my first one was, my very first one was a book I published under a pen name, and the book is called Revelation of the Holy Grail. It's about the Holy Grail mysteries, and it was I wrote it under the pen name of Chevalier Emerus. Which just means Knight of Light. Right. That's what it means. And so that was my initial book, and then I published Alchemical Keys to Masonic Ritual, and that was based on, I wrote this paper basically that I used to hand copy like hundreds of times to give to people when I would give these lectures, so I was like, oh, this is ridiculous, so I finally just turned that into a book. And then my third book was the 32 Secret Paths of Solomon, which is about Kabbalah and Freemasonry, some of the Kabbalistic symbolism within Freemasonry. And then I published Entering the Chain of Union, which is about different esoteric traditions around the world that I've encountered in my travels that have symbolism and history and traditions that are, nearly identical with Freemasonry.
Right. And we're going to get into some of that today.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. So, yeah. And then I did a book, Novo Clavis Esoterica, which is kind of a compilation of Alchemical Keys Masonic Ritual and 32 Secret Paths of Solomon with a bunch of other writings in it. Looking at things like Ethiopia and Freemasonry and how that came to be and things of that. And then I
might end up working there soon, by the way.
Ethiopia?
Yeah, well, I've worked there before, but I may actually get a job for like a chief of party for a security project because, the situation there is not very good.
Yeah, like in Oxum or?
No, this would be for the Mitchell Group. It's a company I work for now. So we just won an award with USAID, and I'm waiting to hear if, I'm approved for the chief of party position there.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'll be in Ethiopia. Maybe we could talk from there at some point.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That'd be great. Then my 2 most recent books were the book Elements of the Elements.
Yes.
Which is explores the classical elements and their influence within different traditions, including Freemasonry, and then I have another book called Thoughts from Meditations, which is just, it's exactly what it sounds like, thoughts I've had from different meditations, so that's it. Yeah.
Wow.
So I've stayed busy. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. So, I mean, have you always been interested in kind of mysteries and esoteric ideas since childhood? Were you always one of those kids that always was curious and had deeper questions?
Well, I started out being really fascinated with mythology, in particular the Arthurian legends and the Grail romance.
Okay, right.
That was kind of my thing, I mean, I spent years just studying and reading and researching all that, and it kind of, through a roundabout way, that's kind of what got me, started being interested in other things. But I guess, and then I was also very interested in Eastern thought, Taoist texts in particular, and
Sure.
but I ended up, I mean, it was, and then from there, I kind of got interested in, Christian mysteries and Jewish mysteries, and eventually even studying some Islamic mysteries. So it's just, it's been kind of I don't know, it's been an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. And so you've obviously done some research into your ancestry. Have you also done a DNA test? Do you know what your sort of genetic background
Yeah.
is?
Yeah, I mean, so my background, I mean, I go primarily, my family came over here from Sweden and Ireland and Scotland and England were kind of the main, the four main areas that kind of
Very
converge.
Masonic areas, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my great grandfather Theophil Plank from Sweden. He was involved in the Swedish rite, actually, of masonry. So when somewhere along the line, my grandfather Howard Hogan gave me Theophil Plank's Masonic stuff that he'd been hanging on to. So I have all this like old like jewels and lapel pins and things like this from different parts of the world, from my great grandfathers.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, that had been passed down, which is pretty cool. So
Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on like bloodline, and do you think that in some way you sort of inherit some kind of a propensity towards masonry because of your blood and the DNA? Are you a believer in something like that?
yeah, I think there might be something to. There's certainly some sort of genetic memory, that's carried on. I can't rule it out just because, I was so drawn towards this stuff before I even found out that I had a family connection to it. So, and I can look back on my early life and being really drawn to certain symbols too that I recognize now as having come from this tradition, but at the time I had no idea what it was, and there was something in me that was clearly drawn to it, and I don't know if that was like a genetic memory or or past life stuff, or I don't know,
Yeah.
but certainly I was honed in on it, and it's been a big part of my life and experience ever since.
Yeah, I wonder about the same thing, and I'm a believer in that too. I've done a lot of ancestry research, done DNA tests. I mean, basically, I have a connection to masonry through my mother, which is she's Ashkenazi Jew. My dad is not Jewish; she's Chevrier, but her father's side, my mom's father's side, was Hammond. And so a couple big people I know in my lineage were Dr. John Hammond, who was friends with John Dee and
nice.
and was the royal physician of King James I, basically.
Yeah, sure.
His son. And then also great grandfathers for Thomas More. Yeah. So those are the kind of biggies I found in mine, and I'm like, shit. Well, maybe there's something to it. It's being passed down. This mind that just doesn't stop. Always wanting to know more and unravel the mysteries. But yeah, I've been like that since I was a kid. I was always asking a lot of different kinds of questions. I remember in high school, people used to joke and call the questions I would ask in class Jeremy's. Oh God, he asked another Jeremy.
Yeah.
Because it always opened up Pandora's box of stuff, and people are like, "Come on, can't we just get through this? Why is he asking these damn questions?" And I would sort of do it half jokingly to play with the teacher, a little bit.
Sure.
So I had all these people in my yearbook when I graduated signing, please, good luck in the future, and please don't ask any more Jeremys. So
no, that's great.
That's funny, yeah.
Yeah, I was recently, I did there's a genealogist, a well-known genealogist by the name of Diane Muir, she just did a genealogy book of me, my genealogy. And apparently, I'm also related to Robert Burns,
Hmm.
uh, the poet. So there's kind of that in there too. That somewhere along the lines, the Burns family and the Warren family, uh, I think Robert Burns's daughter, I think his daughter, his mother ended up marrying uh, Joseph Warren's son or something like that. So that's kind of how that
Yeah.
got in there too. So yeah, I mean, there's a rich tradition there, and there must be something in our DNA that's drawing
I
us
think
towards
so.
this
Yeah.
stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And so, yeah, so now I'm thinking about going into some of these questions. I know we talked briefly yesterday. I guess I'll start with the Druze, because I
sure.
know that's something you've been looking into a lot. And maybe you should start at zero because a lot of people don't know what the Druze are. And when I hear Druze, it reminds me of Jews. Um, so maybe a little background. Who are the Druze and what's their connection to Masonry? And, there's a lot there, I'm sure.
Sure. So so the Druze, they are Unitarian Gnostics. And when I say Gnostic, just in case for the audience needs to know, derives from the word gnosis, which just means experiential knowledge in Greek.
Mhm.
But it was a spiritual experiential experience that would be much like enlightenment in the Eastern traditions or nirvana. But it was experiential knowledge. So they believed that anybody could have a personal connection with the great architect, with God, and that we basically we have to remove these filters within ourselves, and once we're able to do that, then we can have this personal connection, this personal awakening. And so they do tend to have religious teachers and mentors within the tradition, but they don't and they even perform ceremonial function, but they don't view like priests as the intermediary between you and God,
Okay.
like many religions do. Instead, they believe
Right.
that God is already there,
Right.
connected to you. You just have to awaken to it, basically. So,
Mm.
and they have ceremonies and stuff designed to help facilitate that process. So the Druze primarily the name Druze comes from their leader, their one of their early leaders, which was a guy by the name of Aldrazi. And essentially, when you talk with the Druze, they'll be the first to tell you that they don't think that Aldrazi was necessarily a great guy necessarily, but the Muslims are the ones who started calling them Druze, um, off because of their leader Aldrazi at one point in
Oh,
time.
I see. That's where the word comes from.
But they don't.
Ozzy Drews.
Yeah, yeah. So they don't really like. They don't see. They know that everybody refers to them as Druze. They refer to themselves as Al Tahid Mohudun, is what they refer to themselves as.
Hmm.
But they recognize that the rest of the world calls them Druze, and certainly the Islamic world, because they're the ones that first started calling them Druze.
I
So
see.
so they just go along with it,
Yeah, I
and
understand how that goes.
yeah, and they exist primarily in Lebanon and in Egypt, though there are Druze all over the world. I've hung out with Druze in Nigeria, and in George Clooney is married to a Druze.
Oh, no shit. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, they're you know, they're kind of all over the place, but they're very they have initiation ceremonies that are designed to help facilitate this awakening. And the earliest,
sorry, are they like a secret society? Is it a religion? Is it an ethnic group?
they're kind of, I mean, they're definitely, they're not, they are secretive. I mean, they're private. Their ceremonies are private. You can only attend them if you're invited or you're born into. They believe in reincarnation, so they believe that you have to be, if you're born into a Druze family, then you become, you know, you're invited to participate in that path.
There you go.
And they have several prophets. You know, they look to the classical prophets of you know, both the Torah and the New Testament as prophets within their tradition and in Islam, but they also they view two of their greatest prophets that they consider are Hermes Trismegistus is what they consider one of their main prophets, and also Pythagoras.
He's a fairly esoteric prophet.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, and they're an esoteric tradition. I mean,
Sure.
so like, yeah, so Hermes, and then also Pythagoras is considered one of their main prophets.
Wow.
So they're known for being builders. Primarily, they build throughout Lebanon and other places. They're known for their building and for their tiling. In fact, if people will have them bless a coin and place it underneath the tiles in the entryway of a new building that's being built, you know, to bring good luck and prosperity, you know, to the family, you know. So like people all over the Middle East hire them. They have a philosophy that's also found within Rosicrucian texts, where it says that they are to secretly or inwardly practice their own religion while outwardly adopting the dress and the habits of whatever country they're living in respecting the laws.
Sounds very familiar to
Yeah.
Masons, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how they do things. That's how they've been doing things. I mean, the earliest references to the Druze go back to you know, around 1100, but we know they go back further than that. And in their own tradition, they say they originally came from Egypt. They say that there was a great flood, and that Enoch had preserved knowledge in two pillars, one to withstand fire and one to withstand water.
Wow, they have all that too, huh?
All of that, yeah, and that's been their tradition going. I mean, back. I mean, at least, I mean, the documents that we have, that's been their tradition going back at least 900 years now. So.
Oh, you have documents from 900 years ago?
Oh yeah, the Druze do,
Wow.
and I've had that good fortune of meeting with Walid Jablat, who's the Grand Master of the Druze, and in Lebanon, and but because one of the things is because they have this doctrine of respecting the laws and the customs of the country in which you live.
Right.
They're also the only religious group outside of Judaism that's allowed to serve within the Israeli military. So, because there's a large group of Druze that exist in Haifa, actually, in Israel. They have a huge a huge community in Haifa in Israel, and I visited them there in Haifa as well. So they, you know, they're kind of this weird, mysterious sect, and
Right.
with initiation rites and the Templars, like back in the day, back in the 1100s and 1200s, were definitely associating with the Druze, both according to Templar documents from that era, and according to Druze tradition. You know, that they had very close associations with the Templars,
Right, because
and
the Templars were in that neighborhood.
they're completely in that neighborhood. Yeah, in fact, and they were learning alchemy from the Druze. The Druze practice alchemy, and they and in more recent years, I mean, recent being like the 1800s, early 1900s, people like Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society were writing about the Druze, and in fact, some people even believe that the masters, the spiritual masters that Blavatsky was writing about, were actually just Druze that were in the same areas that she was at the time. So there's, you know, there's this interesting connection between the Druze and the Masonic tradition. And what fascinated me about the Druze the most, I mean, aside from in my personal journey, I've taken on and been initiated into different Templar traditions over the years. And so when I went to Lebanon and I was meeting with Druze there, they certainly knew the people who had initiated me into different Templar strains. The Grand Master of the Druze knew of him, and I knew of where they were based on these traditions, and so they one of the first things that I learned very quickly is that the Druze have the exact same grip that we find in the Master Mason degree of Freemasonry, the strong grip. That's how they greet each other. And
well, that's how they greet each other just every day, or
between Druze and Druze, and they'll put a the only difference is they put like a sacred, like a cloth over the hands.
Is there any special color to the cloth they use?
Yeah, it's a white cloth, but they have their symbol, the Druze symbol. In fact, hang on a second, I'll show it to you.
Sure, go ahead.
This is a plaque that the Druze gave me when I was in Lebanon, because this is their symbol, right? Well, if you're a Mason, you immediately recognize that symbol as something that's found within the Eastern Star, and the reason for that is Morris. In fact, let me grab something else. Hang on. Morris wrote a book called Freemasonry in the Holy Land, and Morris was of course he's the one who created the Eastern Star ritual.
Yeah, okay.
And he spent time in the Holy Land, and he spent time associating with the Druze himself. So that's where he got that symbol from for the Eastern stars. He got it from the Druze. But that star represents, according to the Druze, each point represents a different point of how gnosis manifests in the world. And it represents according to the Druze, it represents the 5 points of their fellowship, of what unites them with gnosis. And and that star is also related to their grip, which is the same grip that we use in Freemasonry.
Mm.
And it's and when they do it,
Oh, I see.
they say in Arabic, in Arabic they say the word muhadin, or I'm sorry, not muhadin, muhabin, muhabin, muhabin,
Uh-huh.
which means in Arabic it means welcome to the loving place, or welcome to the place of the heart, and it comes from mahaba, which is means love in Arabic. So
Wow.
so here's
Big
this.
reveal.
You're
That's a
right. So
good one.
here's this tradition, right? That like the Druze have been practicing for almost 1,000 years now, right? That is they continue to practice. And by the way, you can find the Druze temples. They always build their temples on the highest hills and the lowest valleys of throughout the Middle East, and they their sacred areas are usually where the tombs of saints within their, what we would call saints, but they don't call them saints, but holy men within their tradition,
Or whatever.
yeah, it's where they're buried, so like so where they're buried, they set up these temples where people go to pray and to meditate and to discuss these ideas. And the other symbol that where you find Druze, if you don't see the star, the other thing that you'll see in the Middle East to find the Druze is they'll have Saint George slaying the dragon, because that's also one of the symbols that the Druze use all over the Middle East. And it's kind of a weird thing, right? You'll be in Lebanon and you'll see like Saint George slaying a dragon, and it's like, well, that's strange. That's not something you normally think of when you think of the Middle East, but that's that's one of the other symbols.
So when you said you got to meet the Grand Master of the Druze in Lebanon, and you've met a lot of Druze. I mean, when you bring up the topic of Masonry, what did Druze say about Masonry?
So not all Druze, there are Druze that are Masons, but not all Druze are Masons.
Sure.
Right? So they certainly acknowledge that there's a connection there. They, in their opinion, they believe that the connection comes from the association with the Templars throughout history. There's always this close association between the Templars and the Druze. And in fact, some even believe that the famous text known as the Corpus Hermeticum was given to Templar families by the Druze, and that the Corpus Hermeticum was then revealed to Europe, which during the Renaissance, which is part of what led to the Renaissance, was this text, the Corpus Hermeticum, which just means the body of Hermes. And it's because the Druze are, Hermes is one of their main prophets, so there's so they believe that the Druze shared ideas of alchemy, Hermetic thought, and other ideas with the Templars, and that the Templars, in fact, one of the rules of the Templars specifically talks about how the Templars had special associations with the Druze, and that they had secret grips and secret words that they would exchange with the Druze, and that the Druze were to be admitted within the Templar halls. Wow. So this, to me, since we can validate, we can prove this Druze connection going back 1,000 years, almost 1,000 years to the Templars. it just kind of makes sense that I mean, the Druze were staying in the Middle East at the time. And yet here we have these traditions developing in France and England and Scotland that were in Ireland that were the same doctrines as what the Druze were practicing, the same grips, the same words, the same everything. And so we need to ask ourselves, who is traveling between the Middle East and the British Isles to that?
Exactly. How did that happen?
How'd that happen? You know, I mean, and the only people that were doing that regularly were the Templars, which, according to both the Templars and the Druze traditions, they say that they were doing that. So to me, it adds a lot of weight and a lot of proof that there's this Templar connection with Freemasonry, like above and beyond anything that, you know, John J. Robinson's written about or anything like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
But what about,
you can't explain it any other way.
What about the Rosicrucians versus the Templar? Who came first, you know? And in Rosicrucian, would you consider that more of like a Gnostic influence? I mean, how do we keep tracing it back? And then the other question is, did the Druze give the information to the Templars, or did they share and they each had a piece of the puzzle? Who came first, you know?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. My research, and I've traveled all over the world looking at this issue. In fact, the Templars were largely started by Gnostic families in southern France that had come out of the Cathars, right?
That makes sense.
The Albigensian Cathars. And the Cathars had close association with the Bogomils in Bulgaria. And there were all these there was these Gnostic groups that were all kind of associating with each other. And so when the Templars journeyed to the Middle East and they encountered the Druze, I mean, they had a lot of doctrines that were similar, right? That were nearly identical already. So they were able to like exchange ideas and start to develop this further, I guess. By the time that the Templars were suppressed, now the Templars they used the symbol of the rose cross. In fact, rose crosses were found in the old Templar sanctuaries. And part of the reason for that was because the rose was an Islamic symbol, and the word rose in Arabic, which is ward, it represented both prayer and meditation and study. It was a symbol for prayer, meditation, and study in the Islamic tradition. Okay, and of course the Templars, having come from this Christian backing, they just kind of united the two symbols,
the cross and the rose.
Right. But according to the Druze tradition, you have to remember they said that they originally came from Egypt. And beyond that, they said that they came from the area of Giza. And in fact, Druze will to this day continue to make pilgrimages to Giza. And the ancient word for Giza in the Egyptian language was Rastau. That was the Egyptian word for Giza, Rastau. And in Rastau in the Greek language, Ras is rose and Tau is cross.
Right.
So the very name Rastau means rose cross.
Right. So there's the whole Cairo connection, right? And Cairo.
That's right. Yeah. Kai and Ro. Right. Yeah. So, so there was this tradition that the Druze acknowledged. The Templars were using this. In fact, the Templars had an elixir a special elixir which they called the blood of Christ,
Hmm.
which they said was a hermetic elixir that they probably gained from the Druze,
Hmm.
that they put in a sacred vessel called the vessel of the Rose Cross that was deposited in St. Paul's Cathedral. So they there was
Wow.
already like this Rose Cross connection there. When the Templars
That's
were,
the makings of a Hollywood movie right there.
oh yeah, for sure,
Definitely.
completely, yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So by the Templars got suppressed in 1307. Jacques de Molay was and Geoffrey de Charnay were burnt at the stake in 1314. At that point, the Templar order was no longer under Roman Catholic patronage, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And most people say that that was the death of the order, that was the end of the order. It didn't exist anymore, right?
Hmm.
Well, actually, there is evidence that it continued to exist in different forms in different parts of the world. Even Albert Pike alludes to this in Morals and Dogma. But there is evidence that it continued to exist in places like Portugal and
Right.
Scotland and France and in other places.
And
One of
I'm
the
assuming it
places
was
that
just
it
more, they were
continued
a
to,
lot more secretive after that,
a
though,
lot
right?
more secretive,
Yeah,
right?
had to be a lot more careful.
A lot more careful, right? And one of the places that continued to exist was in Germany,
Hmm.
in particular in the area of Tübingen. And they
Hmm.
just changed their name at that point in time to the Militia Crucifera Evangelica.
Hmm.
And the there are, if you go to the area of Tübingen, in Württemberg in Germany, I guess the county area of Württemberg in Germany, where Tübingen is, and areas like Kof and Bad Tainach and other areas like that. There's a This is where the Militia Crucifera Evangelica was existing, and we have documents going back to 1598. There was a book called the Neometria that was written that is dedicated to the Militia Crucifera Evangelica and to the Grand Master of the Militia Crucifera Evangelica. That was Frederick, the Duke of Württemberg. He was a
No.
member of it. Also, Queen Elizabeth I was a member of it, and the uh, and it was written by, the book was written by Simon Studion, and in it they have the Rose Cross as a symbol,
Hmm.
as one of their symbols. And this was the same, and the whole book is a 2,000-page book on the esoteric symbolism behind the dimensions of King Solomon's temple.
So when was this
So
book written? Sorry, do you have a date on that book?
1598.
When?
50, it was written in 1598, and the name
Oh,
of the
wow.
book is the Neometria, is the name of it, which just means measurement of the temple.
Interesting.
So so this is happening in this area of Germany. Well,
Hmm.
only a couple of years later, one of the people who came out of this tradition was a man by the name of Johann Valentin Andrea, and he lived in the area of Kof, which is that same area, and he was a member of this tradition, and he's the one who wrote the first Rosicrucian manifestos. So that Rosicrucian tradition came directly out of this, and so yeah,
Right.
it was absolutely came out of this this underground Templar movement that existed. So
Right. So how far back can we trace this idea of the Rose Cross? I mean, you mentioned Egypt.
yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on it going back further? Do we have any evidence of that symbol existing? I mean, even in Egyptian times, do we have any Egyptian, relics of something that looks like a rose cross or a hieroglyph or anything like that?
There are, well, there are the Coptic traditions in Egypt, have, going back thousands of years, we have them using the rose cross as a symbol
Hmm.
within Egypt. We don't see it in Egyptian hieroglyphs. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
rose cross symbol
Too bad, right?
in Egyptian hieroglyphs
Right.
or anything like that. But there is, there's this tradition. There's clearly this alchemical tradition, if nothing else, that came out of Egypt. In fact, the word alchemy comes from alchem, and chem came from the word kemet, which
Right.
was the ancient Egyptian word for Egypt.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there's this tradition that that clearly existed, and it was being perpetuated by these traditions, and which is still preserved within Freemasonry today. So, I believe that you can definitely connect these
Right.
things. And one of the other places where you find one of the earliest symbols of the Rose Cross that I've found, by the way, is if you go to the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul,
Hmm.
which was one of the first cathedrals that was ever built. I mean, it took them almost 1,000 years to build this building with this giant dome in it, and it was a Christian church for forever, and then it became a mosque, and now it's a museum. They're talking about making it a mosque again. But in the Hagia Sophia, you find things like there's graffiti in it that had been left by Vikings that were visiting it, like way back in the day. It says like Sven was here, whatever. And then, but there's within the painted in the ceiling of the Hagia Sophia itself are rose crosses everywhere.
Wow.
And what's interesting about it is that building of the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, it was based off of the architecture of a smaller building that's nearby it. And that smaller building is it's now known as the Little Hagia Sophia, but it used to be known as the Church of Saint Sergius and Bacchus, like way back in the day. And that building was used as the Templars as their headquarters in Istanbul.
Interesting.
Well, in Constantinople, when it was still Constantinople. And what's fascinating about that is that the ceiling tiles in this building, which is now a mosque, but was a church for forever, there are certain geometric patterns on the ceiling that we now recognize, we know are what are known as somatic
Patterns.
patterns, right?
Yeah.
And the only other place in the world that dates back to that time period that also has that depicted is Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland.
Oh, wow.
So to me, there's people that want to debate on whether the Templars had any influence in the Sinclair family as they were building the Rosslyn Chapel, but you can't explain that any other way. The fact that the only two places in the world that have these somatic music designs being depicted in them are Rosslyn Chapel and the Little Hagia Sophia church.
Wow, that's amazing.
Which both had Templar connections. So yeah, so I mean, but anyhow, that Rose Cross is also depicted, and it's and also, by the way, in that Little Hagia Sophia Mosque, on the top of one of the first of all, the building is built like a giant beehive. Okay, so it's meant to look like a giant beehive with even honeycomb shaped tiles, ancient tiles that the Templars put in there. And on the tops of some of the pillars in the little Hagia Sophia are Mason marks. And one of the Mason marks that's depicted above the pillar is of a square and compasses next to an Egyptian ankh. And that dates to the time of the Templars. So this is the earliest example of the square and compasses being used, connecting it with Egypt, that I've found anywhere in the world.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So, you know, digging in a little more on this rose cross symbol, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, one, I know that you are, you know, big into the Knights Templars, and there's the Red Cross. I guess we could start. I mean, there's the rose, then there's the cross. So what about the cross symbol? I mean, what does that mean to you? I mean, from your research.
Well, from my research, it was an emblem that represented. So the vertical arm represented a spiritual ascent.
Sure.
And the horizontal arm represented material grounding, right?
The fall almost.
So the union of the two represented spiritualizing the material and materializing the spiritual.
Unification of heaven and earth.
That's correct. That's what it represented, you know, and
that's
it's
right.
interesting if you consider the main working tools of the principal officers of a Masonic lodge. You know, the plumb, the square, and the level. You know, the plumb is what measures, you know, verticals, right? The level is what does horizontals.
That's right.
And then the square unites the two. So when you put those three together, you get the cross, right?
That's true.
It's the same symbolism behind,
right.
You know, what that early crosses, and the Templars, you know, in particular, they used an equal armed cross in general, but you know, I mean, it was a, you know, it was a symbol used all over the place.
That's right.
What is interesting is from a Gnostic standpoint, you know, the Gnostics didn't believe that even though they were Christian, they considered themselves Christian. They didn't view the cross as a symbol of that this is what Jesus died on and was resurrected from. In fact, they just viewed it as a symbol of matter and how we're able to raise our consciousness above it. So they, in fact, they didn't even believe Jesus died on the cross. They interpreted as it was all a metaphor, and it was an initiation ceremony that symbolically represented the death of our old self and the awakening of our new self to gnosis.
That's right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, yeah. So that and they did it because they saw the Greek word anastasis, which is usually translated as resurrection in most modern New Testaments. But the Greek word anastasis itself actually means awakening or to wake up. And so they interpreted the resurrection as not a zombie Jesus, you know, coming back from the dead, you know. Right. Right. They interpreted it as awakening to gnosis. And so the cross just became the uniting of the rose on that cross, instead of putting Jesus on the cross, represented the awakening of consciousness out of the cross of matter, much like Yeah, much like the lotus, you know, opening up,
Yeah.
growing out of the slime in the.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that. I mean, do you feel like that rose and the lotus are really the same, just a different representation in a different period?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I do. Even beyond, because even beyond the Islamic, you know, word for rose, which is ward, which sounds a lot like word. So,
Right.
which puts a whole nother
Oh,
spin on
yes.
the lost
Yeah.
word of masonry, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
The
yeah.
word then becomes this meditation practice,
The
right? And
lost
so
ward of masonry,
the
maybe.
last word of masonry, which would
Yes.
be a meditation practice, right?
Right.
But but the it represented the unfolding of consciousness out of the cross of matter, right? And
Right.
so,
Yeah, that was it. I mean, I've gotten some interpretations that I liked. I mean, which align with what you're saying from some Rosicrucian traditions that the rose, obviously it's this experience of, heaven and earth uniting, and through this material experience we're in as a spiritual being, in a sense, there is this unfoldment or the blossoming of the heart, or the growth or the evolution of the soul that occurs, and that's really what this whole process is about. Is that unfoldment, like a blossoming?
yep, yep,
That's
I
pretty
would.
much it, right?
That's it. Yeah, I mean, I'd
Holy
agree with
smokes,
that
man. Well
100%. I
done.
mean, different traditions have added on to it, you know, and the rose itself has changed, you know, colors over time or shapes. I mean, I think in the earliest Rosicrucian manifestos, which were known as the Fama and the Confessio, and then later the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz,
Right.
they don't really say what kind of cross it is, or what kind of rose. They have a character in it who's kind of like a Hiram character whose name is Christian Rosenkreuz, and the where he travels to all these areas in the Middle East where the Druze reside, by the way. You know,
That's
where
right. That's right. I
it talks
remember that.
about the
Yeah.
areas where the Druze are that he goes to visit, right? And
Right.
the but if like Johann Valentin Andrea, for example, his personal coat of arms was a St. Andrew's cross surrounded by roses.
Hmm.
And this later also became the symbol for the Royal Order of Scotland.
Huh.
But it was, in fact, the word Andrea in German just means Andrew,
Hmm.
English. So Andrew is Andrea. So Johann Valentin Andrea just is, you know, it's taken from Johann, which is John, Valentine, which comes from Valentinius,
Hmm.
who was a Gnostic. You know,
That's
he
right.
was one of the
Yeah.
Gnostic leaders, in Andrea, which is Andrew. You know, and if you know anything about the Templar connections with the Order of St. Andrews in
Hmm.
Scotland, you know, it's kind of all, you know. So he used the St. Andrew's cross, which is more of an X,
Right.
with the roses, and that could be because you know, the X is forms a basically a downward delta and an upward delta joining, so it represented that as
Ah.
above, so below.
Oh, I see. Right. That makes sense too. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, hermetic idea,
Right.
from the doctrines of Hermes, you know. So yeah, it's really fascinating. But other times, you
Yeah.
know, the cross is taken on, you know, like a golden cross, you know, with the
Right.
rose coming out of it, or, you know,
Right.
the earliest depictions of it I saw in Istanbul at the Hagia Sophia. It's just a red cross with a rose in the center of it. But
Amazing. Amazing.
the symbolism's the same no matter what you do. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah. So I wanted to see if there's any connections. Another symbol that's always been a bit mysterious to me is the fleur de lis,
Mm-hmm.
along with the ankh. I've been trying to get to the bottom of both of those for a while. And yeah, so what do you think about those two? And
Well, which should we start with the fleur de lis?
sure. Yeah.
So it, so there's different, the fleur-de-lis, which is a French symbol. It's associated with being a French symbol. It's the flower of life.
Right.
That's what it's being associated with. It's been different people have interpreted different things with it. It's basically, it has a let's go see if I have one around here.
Like a sprouting,
Yeah, it has
in the
three.
middle and then it curves around.
Yeah, it has three, what would be like petals
Yes.
going up the top, and then a base, and then three petals going on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And some have interpreted that as, represent within Christian tradition, they represented that as the Trinity, right? The three right. Above and the three below kind of represented the influence of the Trinity above and the Trinity below is what they came to represent. But the others, they're definitely in triangle shapes, if you look at the geometry behind it. So, some have seen it as representing the as above, so below idea. But there was a writer in the 1800s by the name of Hargrave Jennings, who wrote a book called, what's it called? Hang on just a second, I'll tell you.
Sure.
Sorry, I had to look in my library here. Rosicrucians, Their Rites and Mysteries is the name of it.
Oh.
And in that book, which was published in the late 1800s, he suggests that the fleur-de-lis symbol originally came from the bee symbol, the symbol of the bee. And that it evolved, the bee symbol evolved into the fleur-de-lis symbol. That was his, basically
insect,
like
the insect, the bee, not the letter B.
Right, the insect,
right.
bee, that the the wings and the antenna and everything, the body of the bee ended up becoming this symbol of the fleur-de-lis. It evolved.
Maybe it's the fleur de bee.
Fleur de bee, right? Yes, the flower to the bee, maybe. But it. So that was his belief that it originally came from that. I'm not as inclined to believe that. I actually think that the fleur-de-lis evolved from the symbol of the trident in the ancient world. Which you find all over the ancient world. I mean, it's called the Trishula in India. It's called the trident in Europe. You find it associated with Poseidon, and then you even find it in the New World as well, the quote unquote New World. If you go down to look at the Mayan ruins, like down in places like Tulum and Nakamul in fact, Nakamul, which is down in the Yucatan, is the second largest Mayan pyramid in the world. And if you climb to the top of it, at the top of that pyramid is a trident. And according to standard archaeologists, they say that symbol originally came from a different symbol that the Mayans used that was called the falling god symbol, which was this symbol. It looks like the symbol of a god falling out of the sky. And so that was their that was the Mayan symbol. They kind of turned it into this trident looking thing. So I think what happened in Europe is that this trident symbol kind of evolved and morphed into what's now the fleur-de-lis symbol. Yeah.
But why then the fleur idea? Why are we bringing in flower here and life? See, that's what makes me wonder. Is there a connection with the
Yeah.
Rosicrucian? You know,
Uh, yeah. Well, there's some traditions that suggest uh, that 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 trident symbol. Of course, one of the other symbols that symbol is also associated traditionally with Atlantis,
hmm,
Plato's Atlantis, and
the trident, just the
Atlantis.
trident.
Right, right.
Okay.
In Atlantis, the whole mythos of it was this high civilization that had these technologies that were fantastic, and that this spiritual philosophy,
Sure.
and that something happened, some great disaster happened, I mean, that caused it to sink basically and fall apart, and cause great flooding around the world, and um, people like early Masonic scholars, they look to the whole story of Noah as being an aspect of this story of Atlantis,
Hmm.
and that the great flooding that happened that Noah was escaping from was actually the same flood of Atlantis. And
Ah,
so Freemasons, which were known as the Noahite religion.
right.
In fact, if you go to Anderson's constitutions, which are the earliest constitutions of Freemasonry, which were, published back in the 1700s. It specifically refers to Freemasons as Noachites, or those of the religion of Noah. The religion that united all men that escaped the flood, basically. And so this this symbol of the trident kind of evolved into a symbol of life preserving and escaping disaster, right?
Hmm, interesting.
The cataclysm, right?
Well, and it's also interesting the connection with Poseidon, associated with water and a flood, and he had a trident.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So I think that's probably the accurate evolution of that symbol.
Right.
And then of course that flower, it evolving into a flower, as you correctly pointed out, is very similar to this idea of the rose or the lotus.
Right.
The same idea of this blooming thing, even though it's not a real flower. It's just a design that's flower
Right. It's a flowering design in a way.
like,
Yeah.
that kind of emphasizes this as above, so below idea, that's found within the Hermetic,
I wonder if
alchemical.
there's a connection to like authority, with the trident, and the supernals and the Kabbalah, like I have the supernal authority as king, and I'm also connected to the idea of the rose and the rose cross, like somehow combining that idea of authority of the rose cross somehow, because it is very much connected to royalty, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I
Servant.
mean, yeah, it became a symbol of royalty, particularly French royalty,
Hmm.
and in particular this is kind of going down another rabbit hole, but that symbol of the fleur de lis became what was known as a Merovingian symbol. And
Hmm.
the Merovingians were the French bloodline. And
Yes.
according to the Merovingian tradition, they say that they came from the sea in antiquity, much like the stories of Atlantis, and
Wow.
and in fact, yeah, they say they came from the sea, settled on the shores of France, and then started to build up the tradition there, So, um, there's probably something connecting all of that, and
Sure.
all of
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
mystery. So, and then it just got passed on as a French symbol, So,
Yeah. So what
um,
about the Ankh? What's up with the Ankh?
so the ankh, there's different theories behind its origin. Some people say it represents of course, the ankh is like a tau cross, which
That's
is a
right, on the bottom.
T with a
Yep.
loop on the top of it,
Yes.
and it was a symbol of life. It represented not just, some people say it was a symbol of eternal life, but it was because it was a cross, and it was
Right.
one of the earliest forms of the cross. But it seems to have also represented kind of like a life force. If you look at the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, uh, some really good ones are, if you look at some of the reliefs of the pharaoh Akhenaten,
Hmm.
in particular, who was the first monotheistic uh, pharaoh. They're depictions of the sun, which he called the Aten, and which, by the way, is the origin of the word Adonai. Atenai meant my Aton, and
Mm.
Adonai became Adonai, which means, of course, Lord in Hebrew. So that was the kind
Oh,
of the origin of that.
wow.
But that he would depict the Aten, the solar disk, and he would show rays coming out of the Aten, and on the ends of those rays were ankhs that were going into the nose
That's right.
of the pharaoh. He was breathing it in. He's breathing in that essence from the sun. So
Right.
it seems to have represented a life-giving principle.
Right.
The origin of it, some people say it represented a bootstrap, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Others have said it represented a tool that was used for measuring the water table of the Nile, so you could tell how deep the Nile was flowing,
Mm.
and the loop was kind of like a handle that you could then push the thing down into the rich soil of the Nile to measure how
Oh,
deep
I
the
see.
water table went
Okay. Right.
underneath the soot. And that's, you'd need to know that for farming purposes, to bring about, you know for irrigation and bringing about life, to growing crops.
Right.
Others have interpreted it more from a sexual standpoint, with saying that of course the loop represented the yoni, or the female genitalia, and the the bottom part of the tau cross represented the phallus,
Right. I've heard that one too.
and it was the two uniting. I mean, so
I think
there's
that's a bit
different.
of a stretch, but yeah, you never
It's a
know.
bit of, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems to be. No one really can say for sure what the origin of this is, but what we do know is that it
Right.
was, it was definitely it represented this life-giving principle, one way or another. So,
Yeah. I mean, I looked into it for a little
um,
while,
but
and
this,
I looked into it for a little while. And one of the other things I found out was that it might have been related to the bull vertebrae. Apparently, in some of the ceremonies, and I looked it up online. I was looking at vertebrae and stuff, and there are certain sections of the vertebrae where, when you take it out, it has a stick, and then it has two things, and then a circular thing in the top. It looks just like an ankh,
could
and
have
that they
been.
use that ceremonially somehow.
Yeah, I mean, the bull in particular was very big in one of the earliest periods of Egypt. I mean, it
Mm,
was, in fact, it was during the age of Taurus
that's right.
that it was particularly being used, and which makes sense because of the bull. And in fact,
Yeah,
Isis
yeah.
Hathor was depicted with bull
Yes,
horns and
yes.
everything else
Yeah,
during that zodiacal age. So, and that's probably when Moses burned the golden calf.
yeah. Mm,
Uh, what he was doing was he was probably burning an effigy of a bull, you
hmm.
know, from Egypt from that time period, and it probably represented the end of the age of Taurus
Mm,
and the beginning of the age of Aries, which is
mm.
what Moses was bringing in. It was right during
Right.
that same time period, and of course, uh, this is when the priesthood started being called shepherds. Moses was described as having horns like a
Yeah.
like a ram, you know, and
Right.
you know, which would be so that the symbolism switched from the bull to the ram.
That's right. As the sort of processional changes
You know,
occurred.
during the age of
Ages.
Aries, was it switched from Taurus to Aries. So
Hmm.
you know, it's possible the arc, the ankh goes back to uh, that, you know, I mean,
Bovine or the bull
bovine.
spine.
Yeah,
Well, also
exactly.
think about the spine as the kundalini, the energy that flows,
Sure.
the prana, the chi, or whatever you want to call it, the ether, the electricity,
Yeah.
and then it was called life. The symbol of life. And like you said, it was being projected into someone's nose as a kind of a spiritual enlivening of some kind through energy. Who knows? It's so fascinating. I mean, and also the Tau cross thing really struck me when I was doing research, but I can never figure out. Okay, so the bottom's the Tau cross. So what's the loop at the
The
top? It
loop.
looks like an upside down droplet or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's where where some people say it's, you know, a yoni or, you know,
Right,
female
right.
genitalia,
That's
but
a bit
it's,
poppy nowadays.
yeah, it's a bit poppy, but you know,
Yeah.
it could just represented uh, you know, some sort of eternal cycle, you know, the you know, from a geometry standpoint, you know, the circle always represented uh, spiritual things,
Right,
and you know, because spiritual things are eternal, they have no beginning and no end.
right.
And so it was a circle is the perfect symbol for it, and it's part of the reason why, if you know, if you look at the square and compasses, right, the the square can be used to create squares,
Yeah.
which was in the ancient world was a symbol for material things,
Mm,
and the compasses could be used to draw circles, which was a
mm,
symbol of spiritual
that's right.
things.
Yeah.
So it's uniting the spiritual and the physical,
Right.
much like, you know, the cross, the Templar
Cross symbol.
cross, and
Yeah.
then it was also, and it could be that the ankh is also, you know, a symbolism of that. If we consider the loop part
Right.
on the top and then this tau
Yeah.
the on the bottom, you know, which is kind of like a square,
Right.
right? Or
Right.
and or it's like kind of a cross between a square and a triangle if you look at the geometry behind it. But it's definitely, you know, uniting these two parts, you know, in much
Right.
the same way that the square and compasses do. So
Right. Yeah. I've thought about that circle idea, and with the Ankh, my only issue is that why isn't it just a straight circle then? I mean, they know how to draw circles, but they
right,
made it like a loopish type thing.
yeah, they
You
did,
know,
yeah.
and so why the loop? Why that odd, shape? So yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, some might say, well, it was just a handle.
Yeah.
You know, um, I don't know.
We don't,
Yeah,
we yeah, we don't, no one can say for sure
yeah,
what it is. I mean, at this point, I mean,
yeah,
but it is an ancient symbol. Clearly, it's a
totally.
symbol associated with Egypt. And like I, like I mentioned before, the earliest depiction of the square and compasses that I have found in Europe was made by the Templars in their commandery at the Little Hagia Sophia Mosque, was
Mm,
now the Little Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul.
wow.
And it's depicted, you know, it's the square and compasses depicted right next to an Egyptian ankh, you know, so they were clearly trying to unite those two symbols together somehow, or at least that
Right. No,
tradition
that's so
somehow
fascinating.
in that building, and you can still go see it to this day. I mean, it's still there, you know. I mean,
Wow.
so it's you know, it's there's, I don't know, there's something to that, you
There
know.
is, oh, definitely something to it. Well, it's good that there's still some mysteries out there to explore, right? Look at the
Yeah,
bright
that's
side.
right. Hey, hang on just a second. I'm going to adjust
Okay, no
the
worries. Go
light
ahead.
here just a second. Hang on. The
So I
sun
got
finally
a
rose and
bunch
it's
of
coming in that window now, so I don't need that light blaring on me.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of other things that I wanted to chat about. Let's see. Well, the Spock hand thing, I've seen you
Yeah.
do that. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit. I thought that was really fascinating. And I also wondered, how the hell are you able to do that? Did you train yourself?
To do that.
Yes. Or is that just something you're like, it just came naturally, or?
I guess, yeah, I guess I started doing it when I was younger.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But I was never really into Star Trek so much,
Right, right.
necessarily. But this symbol, uh, well, I do say symbol because it's when you do this, it's meant to be a symbol. If you look at when Hebrew Jewish priests
Hmm.
give blessings,
Yes,
they do it with their hands like this.
that's right.
And when Eastern Orthodox priests give blessings, they also put their hand like this to give a blessing.
Wow.
And when the Sufi tradition of Islamic Sufi, they're the mystics of Islam, they're the Gnostics
Sure.
of Islam, the Sufi, they also use this sign they put it over the heart, and it's called the star sign.
Oh,
And it's a sign of respect and salutation. But it, and in the Hopi tradition and in the Mayan tradition, they put their hands like this to give a grip. And they
mm,
say that that grip, according to the Hopi tradition, they say that at one point in time, all the people of the earth were together
mm.
and that the Great Spirit separated them. But before he separated them, he gave the elders, the priests, the shaman, a special grip using this.
Hmm.
So that they would, when they all came back together again at some point, they would be able to give this grip and would be able to all recognize each other, that they had come
Oh,
from the same
right.
origins, right? So I've given this grip to Hopi and also to Maya down
Wow.
in down in the
They're like, my
Yucatan.
long lost brother, you're back.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So the fact that I can go down to the Yucatan and meet with Mayan elders and give this a grip with the hand like this, uh, and I can also go to Lebanon and meet with the Grand Master of the Druze, or any of
Yeah.
the Druze sheikhs, and give the exact same grip.
Right.
It's pretty unbelievable,
Yeah.
but it's true. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
fantasy or
Yeah.
anything. It's true. I've
I mean,
gone to these
I mean,
places.
I think you mentioned on another interview I saw with you that's what is it related to Shin, the Hebrew letter Shin?
Yes, yeah. So the reason why in the Hebrew tradition, this shape represents the Hebrew letter Shin, which is kind of like it would be like SH in English, I guess. You
Right.
know, but Shin represents the word Shin actually just means tooth, but uh, it kabbalistically it represented fire.
That's right.
So it also represented the number 300, but it represented not just fire in the mundane sense, but like a spiritual fire, like
Mm.
a um, a gnosis. Actually, is really what it represented. It was the divine fire, an illumination, right? It
That
represented
burns away all the dross and imperfection.
burns away the dross, and it represented the light of wisdom, right?
Sure.
So this was Shin, and so you find it within of course, within the Hebrew Kabbalistic tradition, and in the Christian tradition. If you if you take the name Jesus in Hebrew,
Hmm.
which is Yeshua, uh, so the name of God in Hebrew, which is Yahweh, is spelled Yod He Vav He,
Yes.
right? Well, if you insert Shin in the middle of that, so it's spelled Yod He Shin Thou He. That's how you can spell Yeshua or
Is it
Jesus.
Yeshua or Yeshua?
Yeshua, yeah. So
Yeshua.
right, which was the name of Jesus, right? I mean, they just, when you take
Right.
Yeshua and you transcribe that into Greek and Latin, and then eventually
Right.
into English, you get Jesus, right?
Right.
So so it represented the light of God, right? Is really what Yeshua means Kabbalistically, right?
Sure.
It was
Exactly.
that fifth element, that ether, that divine fire,
That's right.
giving expression to consciousness in the world,
Right. Right.
right? And so so you find the same mystery within all of these different traditions all over the world, and of course we find it within Freemasonry too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you in most jurisdictions around the world, you can't give the strong grip of a master mason without having your hand in this shape, in order to go to do it. So it's the same tradition and symbolism that you find all over the world, and so we're clearly all coming from similar roots in that
Right.
regard, and passing the same mysteries, and that's part of what makes that particular grip so powerful, because if you can go both sides of the Atlantic, and the priesthoods, the elders, the shaman of all these traditions recognize that and use it, then it implies that there's something bigger going on there, that
Oh,
unites us all.
absolutely. Yeah, I believe that.
So yeah.
Yeah, and along the lines of the sort of the letters and stuff, I also wanted to talk to you about the vowels and this idea of the sacred vowels and the seven sacred vowels
Yeah.
and this IAO.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on these vowels and the IEO and
Yeah.
all that?
Okay. Well, all right. So
You're probably
within
gonna
the
need to sleep for like a week after you're done with me. Sorry
That's all
about
right.
that.
All right, it's good. So like in the most ancient languages, consonants represented the physical forms of physical reality,
Mhm.
and vowels represented the spiritual force that gave expression or life to those physical forms.
Maybe the vowels are the ankh.
Yeah, well,
Think
yeah,
about it that way.
maybe. Yeah,
Maybe
I
the
mean,
ankh is the first vowel.
maybe. I mean,
They only had one
maybe. Yeah,
vowel. It was the ankh.
yeah, that's right. That was it. I mean,
We're discovering this live on the show, folks.
they did. So like, you if you have a word, you cannot you can't give expression to those consonants without there being vowel sounds in it, right? The vowel
Yeah.
sounds are what
Otherwise, it's just
are the breath,
right.
if you will,
That's
that
right. The breath of
gives it
life.
expression, right? So classically there were seven vowels, but those seven vowels could be broken down into three sounds or three vowels.
Hmm.
So and those three, the three root vowels were I, A, and O, because
Mhm.
I can also be pronounced E,
Yes.
A can also be pronounced Ah,
Yes.
and O can also be pronounced oo or you,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So the seven vowels can be broken down to these three vowels.
Sounds.
And these three vowels were considered the the Gnostic traditions around the world.
Mm.
They all believe that the secret name of the great architect, uh, or one of the secret names, was composed of these three vowels of E A O, or E
Wow.
A
Wow.
I A O, right?
Right.
And so
Or Iau,
E A O,
which
right?
is like Yahweh, but without the
Yahweh, that's
N.
right. Or from if you look Adonai, the vowels in it, A O I, right?
Right.
Or
Differently, but
Je,
yeah.
in Latin, Jehovah,
Right.
I-O-A,
Right. You get them in there too. Yeah, that's true.
like, so
Yeah.
these three, uh, so these three vowels, and you find it even within if you go to like the Mandan tribe or a number of the tribes here in North America, uh, the name for God or the Great Spirit is also Iowa.
Hmm.
And so you'll find Iowa as again IAO is the name of the Great Spirit. And in the, like, if you go to
Wow.
like Aztec or Mayan, Iowadl, is the name of God. But again, it's IAO, and then it's like a TL at the end of it, for
Hmm.
Iowadl. And that's where the word like Quetzalcoatl comes from, but it has that IAO in there. So
Wow.
it's something you find on both sides of the Atlantic, but this IAO was like the three expressions, or a trinity, if you will, of or a triunity was
Mm.
maybe a better word.
Right.
Three aspects of one expression of this breath of of the great architect. And
Amazing.
yeah, so
Amazing.
yeah, so this and by the way, if you take the vowels in the first 2-degree passwords of Freemasonry, the first one is OA, right, and the second degree is AI. So, again, you put those two together, you still get OA and I, as
Wow.
the main vowels in the first 2-degree passwords of Freemasonry. So,
Right. And I think there is some Gnostic. I mean, I have the Nag Hammadi library. I've had it for many, many years, and I think there is one text in there that really goes into these vowels. And I don't remember the exact words, but at one point Jesus said something like, that's the most sacred thing, other than, he said, the vowels.
yeah, the iota, the
Yeah.
alpha, and the omega,
And so
right?
basically, he was essentially saying that is the most sacred thing.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly what he said. And if you look at there's an old Templar seal going back to the 1200s, uh, that shows there's a Gnostic figure known as Abraxas, and
Yes.
it shows Abraxas. And this Templars were using this like back in the 1200s.
Wow.
It shows Abraxas, and then Abraxas is always depicted with the vowels I, A, and O on it. So you see that from the earliest Templar seals. And in the Sufi
Wow.
traditions, the
So maybe that was
Sufis,
the key, is that if you want to become like Abraxas, this transformational character, you chant these vowels.
that's right. Well, and in the Sufi traditions in the Middle East, Islamic Sufi traditions, they have three main signs that they use in their tekkes. The tekke
Mm.
is like a lodge.
Mhm.
The first is called the C sign, which is this across
Mhm.
the throat. The second is
The
called the
Sufis, right?
saw. Right. The second is called the saw sign,
Mm.
which is the same thing across the chest.
Right.
And the third is called the so sign, which is across the abdomen. Right.
Right.
And they will chant them. They'll go si 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 sa 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 so 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 si 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 sa 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 so 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 so. And in the Sufi
Wow.
tradition, the z represents the invigorating force, and then of those vowels, I, A, and O. So in
Right.
the
Right.
Sufi tradition, um, you have this as well. So you find it all over in the secret traditions, the mystical traditions of all over the
Wow.
world.
Wow. And so that maybe correlates with the different parts of the body, like the water being sort of below with the ooh, maybe. And then the what is it, E next, or is E,
E,
yeah,
yeah, E the chest,
the
or,
air.
or, or ah is the chest.
Ah is the chest, the air. And then E would be the sort of fire of the mind,
Right. Correct.
intelligence. And
Yep.
wow. So does that connect to the sort of those three elements of, well, yeah, it does, right? Fire, water, and air.
Yeah. So in all of these traditions, and you find this in Masonry too, and you find it within the Gnostic baptismal rites, you find it in the Kabbalistic traditions. There was a progression in the alchemical traditions. There was a progression of moving from water to air to fire, and that this progression moved its way up the body, and it represented a transmutation process. And for example, in the Hebrew Kabbalistic tradition, in the most secret of the Hebrew Kabbalistic traditions, not the kind of poppy hermetic stuff that you see being published in books today by like Golden Dawn and things like that. Right. But
be careful you don't start a flame war now.
No, yeah, I don't. I'm not trying to diss anybody
right?
here.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just trying to say, if you study original source Kabbalistic texts like the Sefer Yetzirah and the Zohar and the Sefer HaBehir and the Tanya and other of these early Kabbalistic texts, they make it very clear that there are. So the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. Okay, and these 22 letters are divided into like parts, right? Where there are what's known as 3 mother letters of the Hebrew alphabet, 7 what are known as double letters because they have both a hard and a soft sound, and then 12 what are known as simple letters. The 3 mother letters represented the elements water, air, and fire. Mem was water, Aleph was air, and Shin was fire. The 7 double letters represented the 7 planets, right, in antiquity, and the 12 simple letters represented the 12 signs of the zodiac. So in the Hebrew Kabbalistic tradition, each of these letters, the combinations of these letters represented energy aspects of God manifesting, and in different places, including within the body itself. And so they set up a diagram known as the Kabbalistic Tree of Life that was arranged on 3 different pillars. The 3 pillars represented wisdom, strength, and beauty. And then there were levels where there were 10 emanations connected by 22 paths on these 3 pillars. Right. And the 10 emanations represented aspects of God's consciousness in terms of qualities. And these 22 paths corresponded to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, forming 32 combinations in all with a hidden 33rd. So this is really the origin of the 32 degrees, well, the 33 degrees in Freemasonry. In fact, you can look at old Scottish Rite diagrams where they actually show which Hebrew letters corresponded with which degree and where they were on the Kabbalistic Tree of Life.
And then I know this is sort of poppy, but the 33 vertebrae is also, there's a
33 vertebrae for sure.
Poppy that almost makes some sense in a way when you think about sort of the path up the spine as spiritual transformation.
That's right. Yeah. And the 33 years of Christ and everything. I mean, it's all there.
And the fact that I wish I was still 33 years old.
Yeah,
that comes into play.
Right, maybe
I'm sure you can relate.
That life. Yeah. So, yeah, but from a Kabbalistic standpoint, the three mother letters went on in the earliest Kabbalistic traditions, went on the three horizontal bars
Mm.
of the tree of life, and the seven simple letters went on the seven vertical paths,
Mm-hmm.
and the 12 I'm sorry, the seven double letters went on the seven vertical paths, and the 12 simple letters went on the 12 diagonal paths on the Kabbalistic tree of life.
Okay, everything
Right.
worked
So I
out so
mean, it
nicely. Yeah,
all it
all
all
lays
correlates.
out so perfectly. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Right. So the three those three horizontal paths that were mem shin or mem aleph and shin.
Mm-hmm.
Mem also corresponded to the abdomen, which is
Right.
where all the liquid functions of the body take place.
Yesod.
Yep. Aleph corresponded to this area Tiferet,
Right. The heart.
or the chest where the lungs are, where the air comes into the lungs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then Sheen corresponded to the above the neck, and to the head, where the
Mm.
electrical signals of the brain are, and where the heat from the head comes off. Right. I
Mm.
mean, 80% of your heat comes from your head.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah,
Is
yeah, of
released
course.
from
Yes.
your is
Yeah.
released from your
That's
head.
right.
So that
Yeah.
was the fire. Right.
And most of the sugar is burned by the brain in the body, like a massive amount.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So it made sense, like that fire was associated with the head, air was associated with the lungs, water was
Yeah.
associated with the abdomen, and and then earth, of course, represented the generative organs, and the grounding towards the
Right.
earth, which you
Right.
walk on earth, So it was divided according to these elemental um, these elemental processes, I guess.
And I'm wondering in my mind now if this somehow could connect to sort of the wisdom, strength, and beauty idea in masonry. Like if we just move the word order around a little bit, like for example, strength could be at the bottom, the water, the generative area, the base, the root,
Yeah.
right? Strength, and then the beauty would be
The
the air,
chest,
the red, the chest, the heart,
right?
and
And
then
with
wisdom, which is
Tippereth,
connection to the divine, right at the fire level.
that's right. I think that's reasonable. I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that, and in the Kabbalistic tradition, the area of the chest is in the heart area was associated with the sphere of Tiferet, which literally means beauty.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, there seems to be some connection there.
Yeah.
And the
Speculating
fact that
aloud, but
the fact that the Sufi divide, to have this division, with their chanting, and then
Mhm.
of course in Freemasonry we find a similar division, and we find it, in the Kabbalistic, it's all the same tradition. It just kind
Right.
of like, gets tweaked a little bit for the different cultures.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I know there's a lot we could talk about in alchemy. I don't want to get into everything because we'd be here all day. But there is one area that's always been a point of confusion to me in alchemy. I mean, I understand that, these are material processes that are reflective of also, personal transformation, more spiritual, internal, psychological transformations that people go through. But I've seen it broken out into very simple models of a process where it's like solve coagula, right? Which is really just two basic things, And then I've seen
Right.
it broken out into 7 steps where you have calcination, you have this, that,
Yeah.
and I've seen 5 or whatever. And so for me, that's kind of confusing that there's it's almost a debate on the steps here. But what makes
Yep.
sense to me is the dissolution phase, that you need to let go of this external ego, this sense of personality, all of your habits, basically, so that you're not a victim of sort of the destiny and the movement of the planets, but you're actually free of all of that dross. So
Right.
and that's why solve a coagula kind of attracts me more than a lot of these drawn out models. But I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, so we can look at a couple different ways. One is, so solve coagula just means solve means to break apart,
Right.
right? And coagula means to pull together,
Mm.
right? So solve coagula means to
Oh, I
break
see.
apart and then to pull it back together again,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
And
Okay.
in fact, it's the same. The word, another word for alchemy is spagyrics, and
Right.
it comes from the Greek speo, which means again to break apart, and gyros, which means to pull together. So,
That's interesting. I mean, what about pull together heaven and earth?
well, yeah, I mean,
In that sense.
the idea behind it is you break things down to its
Mm.
parts and then recombine the pure essence of those parts into a new
Mm.
form that's more
Oh, I
potent
see. Right.
and powerful than the original thing you started with, right?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, yeah. So you just break it down to its pure elements, get rid of all the crap, and maybe there's three pieces here.
Right.
Then you recombine them. Now there's like a clean marriage.
Right. And so just like in the Hebrew Kabbalistic tradition, you had the or within the vowels, right? The vowels, the seven vowels could be broken down into three, can
The
be
three.
reduced to
Yeah.
three, right? In the same way, in the in the Hebrew Kabbalistic tradition, you had the 12 simple letters that could be collapsed into the seven, uh, the zodiac, the 12 signs of the zodiac can be broken down and condensed into the seven planetary symbols,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which could
Yeah,
then be
yeah.
reduced to the three elements.
Right.
Um, so you find that within the Kabbalistic tradition. Within alchemy,
Hmm.
what they've done is they've taken like 12 stages, each of which of the chemical process, each of which can be broken down into seven stages, which could in turn, in fact, be broken down into three stages.
Mhm.
And rather than go through all of that, what we can say is to make it simple,
Mm.
is those three stages that it broken down to was the first stage of the alchemical process was what was known as the digestion stage, in which the substance that you were working on was digested in a liquid, right? If it was a metal, it was digested in acid. If it was a herb, it was digested in an alcohol or a water, right? But the first stage represented this liquid stage of digestion.
It was the breaking of break it down, right, into a liquid form or something.
Correct. Yeah, it was to help it like start to break apart, basically, like
Is
to
that closer to the
digest.
solve coagula?
Yeah, so it'd be like just as like when you eat food
Right.
and it goes into your belly,
Mm.
it gets digested by acids.
It's
It gets
broken
broken
down. Yeah,
down,
that's right.
right? So it's the same thing. So this was associated with the water stage in alchemy, right? Because it was the liquid stage.
Mm.
You were digesting it through a liquid.
Yes.
So it was associated with water. The next stage then was you took, once you had that liquid matrix, right, which
Mm.
was sometimes referred to as the menstruum, but it was this liquid matrix
Mm.
where the thing that you originally had has died and has been kind of dissolved into a
Sure.
liquid.
Sure.
Once you have that, the next stage then it was you would distill that liquid. So you would heat it up in a contained apparatus, which would turn that liquid into a steam,
Mm.
and that steam would rise up, and then it would be captured in another vessel, and it would condense into a new liquid matrix, right?
Now, but that wouldn't be, would that be pure water or would it not be pure water?
No, it wouldn't necessarily. It would depend on what your liquid substance was that you were working with, right? So if you did if you were using alcohol, for example, then what you would be doing is you'd be capturing the alcohol with the oils. Alcohol and oils are like magnets for each other. They absorb each other. It's the reason why if you ever drink too much and you're hungover, you're craving oily foods
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the oils absorb that alcohol, so you don't get as sick, from alcohol sickness.
Okay, all right.
But so those oils end up they absorb the alcohol, or the alcohol absorbs the oils, and then when you distill it over, what you're doing is you're capturing the oils of the original substance that you were digested.
Mm.
Right? So, and because it turns into a steam before it condenses, that was an air vapor, right? So it went from the water process to the air process, right?
Oh, okay, right.
So, because
There you
right,
go. All right.
so you went from
Open up your
water to
body.
air,
Yeah.
right? So then once you captured that, what you have left over at the bottom of the flask after all the liquid has been distilled out of it is you just have these remnants, which are called the bowels of the experiment.
The bowels of
It's
the
also called the
experiment.
feces because
The feces.
yeah, the
Okay, so we went
bowels.
from the menses, then now we've got feces. This is pretty
Correct.
disgusting work.
Pretty disgusting work. Yeah. So, but it looked and it smelled like poop. So
Right. Oh, I see.
because you had distilled everything out of it, and
Right, right.
it's not any different than when you eat food, right? And it's
Mm.
digested and
Also
everything
pretty
else,
disgusting. Yeah, yeah,
and
it's
then
true.
the remnants is
Yeah,
this your poop. So
there you
it's very
go.
similar. So
Yeah.
that poop then, or the bowels of the experiment, then you had to calcinate down with fire in
Mm.
order to extract the salts that were in it. So, because those salts had medicinal value as well. So, the salts.
Wow.
So that was the fire
There you go. So
process,
there's a
right?
nice three-stage process. I like
Right.
that.
So there it is. So you went water, air, and fire.
Perfect.
Just
That makes
like
good sense.
going up on the Kabbalistic tree,
Yes.
the horizontal paths were mem, which was
Right.
water, aleph, which is air, and shin, which was fire. The Gnostic initiation rites, they would baptize people with water initially,
Right.
and then after they had certain psychological breakthroughs, they would baptize them with air,
Oh, wow.
with breath, and then
Uh,
once they attained gnosis, it was a baptism of fire, right? And this is why
isn't
even
that what
Jesus.
Jacques de Molay happened? Isn't that what happened to Jacques de Molay? The
Well,
baptism of fire?
I don't. Yeah, I don't think
Some
he.
gnosis there?
Yeah. I don't.
Hopefully.
I'm sure it was some sort of gnosis for him. I
Right.
don't
Yeah,
know.
I'm sure. I hope so. He certainly deserves some
But
gnosis.
this is why, like, even right. This is why even in the New Testament, Jesus says, those who came before me baptized with water and air. I've come to
Mm,
baptize with fire. Right.
yes.
It's going
Yeah,
through
he's
that
taking it to the next
3-stage
level.
process. Right. And if you consider the penalties of Freemasonry,
They correlate.
right? First degree water, second degree air, third degree fire, right?
Makes perfect sense.
So it takes you through the same process, which is taking place both internally, psychologically, and in the lab. The operations we have to do to the substance we're working on in the lab. They
Mm.
all correlate
So,
from a psychological.
sorry,
Oh,
so brother Tim, the one thing I wanted to clarify is, so when I hear about stages of alchemy like nigredo, albedo, rubedo, but then we
yep,
have calcination. I mean, where do they fit into this three process that we're talking about? Which to me makes good sense.
yeah.
And then we've got all these other models that come in, and I get confused.
Well, so in alchemy, when they talk about things like nigredo and rubio and alba,
Hmm.
those are those are those are color stages, right? Of black, red, and white.
Right.
And what's happening is when you're doing the alchemical process. For example, when you pick a green herb that you're going to work on, let's say we're going to take acacia, right, which has certain medicinal values that are really potent,
Yeah.
right?
I've heard
Um,
about some of those from
yeah,
who's the brother that wrote that book, Alchemically Stoned. You know who I'm talking about?
Newman.
Newman, exactly. Yeah. So he's
Right.
done some studies on acacia, some pretty profound studies.
Right. Right.
Yes.
So let's say you take a green herb, right, and you dry it out, you let it die, and then you just kind of have this kind of dead herb, right?
Hmm.
When you put that into the vessel to digest it, what happens is at first the liquid is going to turn green, is going to be kind of greenish,
Yeah.
but then with heat, it's going to start to turn reddish. Okay, it turns a brownish red color.
Oh,
All right,
like almost like a Lipton tea or something,
right, like a
right?
Lipton tea, exactly.
Versus the
But
green tea.
right, which will turn, but it will turn reddish, right? It'll turn
Yeah.
very reddish, and then once you see that happening, you know it's time to distill it. And when you distill it over, it as it distills over, at first the distillate looks clear, but then as the water, the moisture, and the oil start coming over, it turns white. Right?
Okay. Okay.
And the remnant herb that's at the bottom of the flask, the bowels, they start to turn, blackish, right?
Hmm.
So the herb body is turning blackish, the liquid's turning red, and then as it distills over, it turns white.
Oh, I see. That's where it
Right?
comes from. Because
So
I
it
heard
turns
there was also
black, red,
debate.
and white.
I
Yeah.
heard there was also debate about is it black, red to white, which is associated with the sort of the caps in the Scottish Rite, or
Right.
some people say it's actually black, white, and then red is the final stage.
No.
What's your opinion on
Well, so
that?
what I described is the first process. The second process with calcination, then when you burn the herb down,
Hmm.
at first it turns into a blackish charcoal, and then it turns into a reddish charcoal,
Hmm.
right? After you've burned off all the calcium and stuff, it starts to turn into a reddish gray powder.
Hmm.
And then as you subject it to this other process to leach the salts out of it, those salts are bright white.
Hmm. Okay.
So
Yeah.
that turns black, red, and white. And then the final stage, when you're combining everything, at first, same thing, it turns black at first. And then as it's been um, sitting for a while in a special container, it'll start to turn red. And
Mm,
that red is called the red lion. It was said to heal, anything in the body.
mm.
And then if you subjected an acid to that red lion, it turns white,
I see. Okay. So that's pretty definitive that the
which
order
is
is
called the
black,
white
red, white.
eagle. Correct. And that
Yeah.
that last white was used to transmute base metals into gold. But it had to be red first before you could subject it to acid in order to turn it white. So it goes black, red, white, black, red, white, black, red, white, or 3 times 3 color transformations.
Oh, okay. So would it be a mistake to correlate black, red, and white with water, air, and fire? Would fire be white, or is that am I mixing things that don't really mix?
Well, I mean, when you do those water, air, and fire alchemical processes, that is what's causing the experiment to be turning black, red, and white. So, I mean,
Is
there's
it correlated at each stage though? So the first stage of water dissolution, it turns black.
well, the herb turns black. Yeah, and in fact, it was called caput mortem, which meant deadhead at that
Okay.
stage, and literally dead head, right?
Right.
That was the first stage of the alchemical process. Is
Yeah.
you got the dead head, the caput mortem,
Uh-huh.
right? And that was the water stage, so where you collected the you collected the herb by its roots, you buried it you put it in a vessel in what was called a sand bath,
Mm-hmm.
which was basically the vessel goes in a container that's filled with sand,
Mm.
the rough sands of the sea,
Yeah.
which which provided an equal heat around the vessel, and you digested it, and as you digested it, the herbs started to turn black, and it became known as kaput mortem, or deadhead. So that was the first stage of the alchemical process. The second stage of the alchemical process, you then distilled it, you put it in what was known as an athanor, which is like a tower, and you caused the liquid to distill up to the highest pinnacle of the tower. And in alchemical texts, that was usually depicted by vultures or birds of the air that were picking the heart and vital parts out of the herb and flying to the highest pinnacle of the tower, which was the alchemical athanor, right? So that was the second stage of the process for distillation. And then the third stage was you had the leftover bowels of the experiment, at the bottom of the vessel, and you had to burn those to ashes, and in order to separate the secret salts, which were also known as the hidden mana. So all these things are found within Masonic ritual. If you think about the penalties of the obligations, the classical penalties of the obligations, and you consider all of these elements are there. And they're there for a reason.
You got a great video online where you really expound on that.
Yeah.
What was the name of that video? So if people want to look it up on YouTube, I forget. Or
I think it was called Alchemical Keys to the Gentle Craft or something.
Yeah, something like that. Exactly. Excellent.
Yeah, highly recommend that. Yeah, there's that's mostly what my book Alchemical Keys to Masonic Ritual is about. I mean, there's more to it, but I just wanted to provide the fundamental building blocks that any Mason could read that and understand it from what they've gone through with their ritual. And some would say, oh, well, that's just coincidence, but that's a heck of a coincidence. And we consider that the earliest speculative Masons, people like Moray and Ashmole, they were operative alchemists.
Yeah.
And people like Desagalliers, who was I believe he was the second or the third Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England. And he's the one, many people believe he wrote the third degree of Masonry as we use it today. And he's certainly the one who introduced Solomon's temple into the rituals. Prior to that, the degrees were all based around Noah and his ark. So he really emphasized the Solomon's temple connection. And anyhow, he was an operative alchemist as well, and he was good friends with Sir Isaac Newton. They used to do alchemy together. So
personally, it's harder for me to believe that this isn't all related to alchemy than the opposite.
Right.
But one final question about alchemy, and then we'll drop that. This Negredo stage, the Rubedo, the red stage, and the Albedo, the white stage. I mean, I know they can be called slightly different, but you got the black, the red, and the white. And you've explained sort of the physical processes there. If you had to briefly explain Negredo, the red, the black, the red, and the white stage psychologically or spiritually, like what people are going through, I'd love to hear that.
Well, so black, which was usually associated with death, right? And it represented the death of an old way of thinking. It represented the death of your old self. It represented the corrupting force, not in terms of like bad, but in terms of something breaking down, right? The process.
Some people talk about it being associated with depression or melancholy, or
it can be
crisis.
For sure. Certainly a reflection on your old life, your own. It's a way. It's almost like a mourning, right? A way of mourning who you were, or recognizing that the way you viewed the world might be a lie.
Right. Oh God. your whole
right?
world
And mourning the
falls.
fact that like
Yeah,
it's the loss of your
it's
innocence.
a
You
tough
know, I
thing to
mean, it could,
face.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But it's definitely this death, right,
yeah.
of the old, right? Red, on the other hand, represented life. It was associated with blood, right?
Mm,
You know, and it represented a new awakening, if you will, a
mm.
new, life coming out of the death,
I see.
right?
Right. Okay.
And it represents a new vitality, right?
So would it be like
I mean,
death, and that the second stage is rebirth?
it's like rebirth, right?
Okay.
Exactly. You know, it's a new life. It's new
Right.
life force. If is would be a way to look at it, new
Okay.
perspective, right?
Okay.
But even though you have a new perspective, it's not. You just have all this new enthusiasm and energy for this new
Right.
way of thinking, but that doesn't mean it's tempered. It doesn't mean it's directed
Oh, I see.
necessarily towards higher pursuits.
Got it.
That type of thing, and that's where the white comes in. Then the white, represents the purity or the spiritual wisdom.
Right. The final maturation of the
Exactly.
process.
Right. That
And the
life
red
force goes towards.
and the red ties to the passion that often happens, I guess, when you get in that red phase where you have an awakening. You went through this pain and whatever to let go of the old self, but now you're excited. You're coming into a new world, and so the whole zeal in masonry and the royal,
Yep.
what is it called? The royal arch, and all that stuff connects with the color red too.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And from a like the Gnostics, the early Gnostic traditions, they would say that people are born into this world and they don't realize that they like to use the analogy of Plato's cave,
Mm,
that like
that's
people are
right.
born into this cave, right, where we're seeing shadow projections on the cave wall, and we're thinking that the shadow projections are reality, even though that's not really reality. That
Mm,
they're just like it's like a movie being played around us, right, or something like
that's right.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so they said that the first stage was known as the Hylic stage, where people were just obsessed with the imagery,
Mm,
and they were obsessed with the titillation of the imagery, right? And so everything's about, feeling good and, you know,
Budweiser and football.
right. That's exactly right. And
Order
there's
some
nothing,
pizza,
there's
dude.
nothing else
Right.
beyond, you collect material things,
Yeah.
and that's what makes you
Right.
happy,
Right. Right.
and they say that 80% of the population, that or 85% of the population, they never leave that stage of
Right. Right.
awakening, right?
That's right.
But then initiation took you into, which was in the Gnostic traditions, was represented by a baptism by water.
Mm,
What that did is that caused a death of that
mm.
old way of thinking.
Dissolution. Yeah.
Well, at least not a full death, but certainly a separation from it.
Right. Right.
And that you then began to understand your emotional nature, right? And the water was associated with the emotions,
Mm,
and it was associated with the passions. And so the goal of that first degree of initiation was to learn to subdue the passions, right?
mhm.
To learn to use, not to get rid of your emotions, or not to get
Right.
rid of your emotional energy, but rather to use that energy as a energy for transformation,
Mm,
as opposed to drowning in your emotions,
yeah.
right? So this was the water, right? So that once you're able to show that you're able to subdue your passions, you're able to move on to the next level of initiation,
Hmm.
uh, associated with air. And there's a baptism by air, and this represented things of the mind. And this is where people began to study the arts and sciences, and to study the expressions of life force in the world. This would be would be the study of the 7 liberal arts and sciences
Mm-hmm.
during this
That's right.
this stage.
This awakening period.
You know what I mean? And it was
Yeah.
all about developing the mind, not for the sake of just memorizing facts, but to be able to recognize the interconnectedness of all these things,
Yeah,
these
that's right.
disciplines, and that all minds are connected with one mind. They were all actually one mind. It was one consciousness that was manifesting all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Once and by studying the arts and sciences, it helped you to recognize the patterns of consciousness in the world, and that there is consciousness, there is mind behind it all,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then and that was proof that there was a God, right?
Right.
That there was a great architect, because there was order to it.
Mm.
And so
Right.
then once you got that, and once you began to recognize there was a that these individual minds, and that all of creation was all part of one bigger mind,
Yeah.
at a certain point you symbolically had to die. Your old self had to die, right? Because your identification of who you are changes, right?
Mm.
I'm no longer just Tim,
Mm.
right? Who's experiencing the world, but
Right.
rather I'm the world manifesting as Tim, right? It's a
Right.
change, it's a shift of consciousness. So
Mm.
at that point, your old self died off and you were raised to a new light of understanding. And that new light of understanding was the gnosis, was the experiential knowledge,
And that was the albedo.
where you are more than your physical body,
Right.
that your consciousness exists beyond your physical body, that it exists after death,
Mm.
and that it is connected to something bigger, right? So this was the Gnostic process, and so this is why they had those baptisms of water, air, and fire. And
Perfect.
we find that exact same progression within Freemasonry,
3 degrees.
the degrees of Masonry,
That's
and
right.
that's where that's illustrated beautifully. And that exact same progression is also found in alchemy, going
Beautiful.
through the digestion, the distillation, and the calcination. So it all ties in together.
It really does. I had one other kind of random question here. I don't know if you know anything about this, but one symbol I've been looking into is the 8-pointed star or the compass rose. Has that ever interested you? And have you done any research on that front into the 8-pointed star? I know in the Middle East, you see that a lot through the 2 squares that are kind of intersected but turned slightly.
Yep. Yeah, in the Middle East, you find it everywhere. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like it's certainly a symbol within Islam. Um, it in the Gnostic tradition, it represented what was known as the Aguad.
Mm-hmm.
It's the 8th sphere of gnosis. It literally was a symbol for gnosis, because it was
After
there were
7.
it was after the 7. So there were the
Right.
7 levels, or the 7 chakra, or the
Right.
7 seals that had to
Right.
be opened before
Yeah.
revelation. So like there was the 7. By the way, there was the 7 deadly sins, which represented the blockages.
Right.
And then the 4 cardinal virtues, and the 3 spiritual virtues, heavenly virtues, forming 7, represented the 7 virtues which removed those blockages. So like faith, hope, and charity were the heavenly virtues, and then the cardinal virtues were fortitude, prudence, justice, and temperance,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like, for example, uh, prudence was able to overcome lust, or temperance was able to overcome gluttony, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these 7 virtues, which are taught in the entered apprentice degree, represented the 7 virtues that were able to overcome those 7 blockages of the 7 deadly sins.
Sure, to open up those seals.
When you right, so you open the 7 seals for Revelation. So Revelation wasn't about the end of the world; it was about the end of our old perception of the world and the awakening to gnosis. And once you did that, you reached the 8th sphere,
right?
Which was 8. We're represented by the number 8, and this is why Jesus in Greek, every Greek letter corresponds to a number. So if you switch out the letters for the numbers, then Jesus adds up to 888.
Yeah, that's
right. 888, which represented this gnosis, just like the 24-inch gauge is divided into to 3 equal sections of 888, right? So and in Revelations, where it talks about the 7 churches, in Greek, the 7 churches, if you translate, if you substitute the letters for the numbers and add that up, it adds up to 888 also. So 888 represented the agawad, which was the gnosis. And so that symbol of the 8 points represented the knowledge, the gnosis.
Right, that's right.
That's
profound. I mean, and also from an astrological perspective, the 8th house is the house of the occult and of transformation, particularly spiritual transformation and the mysteries. And it's also symbolized by Scorpio and snakes and things like that you often see associated with the mysteries. So it's a deeply occult house, the 8th house.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would make sense that's where the gnosis would happen, right?
That's right. That's where it is, and it's that sphere. But if you consider from an Eastern standpoint, the chakra or the psychic centers, there's 7 of them that go up the body, and they are also represented by the way, the 7 planets represented the archons in the Gnostic tradition, which were these guardians, these wardens, right? Yeah. Whose job was to keep those blockages closed, or those psychic centers closed in people until they were ready, until the people had the correct grips and passwords in order to move forward in consciousness. And so the wardens would test, each warden would test, the person to make sure they had the proper grips and passwords to move to the next sphere of consciousness. And so once you move through the 7 chakra, the 7 psychic centers of the body, the 7 planets, it represented that you had overcome those influences on the earth, and that your consciousness is now able to transcend that into the 8th sphere, which was the gnosis, right? You escaped the cave, you left the cave, right? You left Plato's cave, and you were able to perceive the reality. Yeah.
And its full glory.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think we did a full marathon episode here, Joe Rogan style, almost we're at 2.5 hours. This is amazing. I knew this was going to happen, but I want to end maybe on just a softer note, not necessarily so profound, but maybe just to get your thoughts on this time we're in. I mean, from Tim Hogan's perspective on COVID and just what's going on, and there's certainly a lot of online education happening in masonry, and I mean, it feels to me almost like a Sabbath that's occurring, where God has just shut everything down and forced us all to break out of our habits of our daily life. And in doing so, it's creating a lot of trouble. but it's also making us reflect and go through some kind of a transformative experience. I mean, that's just my perspective, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think is going on right now in this time period we're in, and implications in masonry, and I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're, according to different traditions, we are, some would say we're in the Kali Yuga right now, which is this dark time, of confusion where people are lost. I mean, we're definitely in a time where our technology has surpassed our spirituality. Well, we're able to, our technology is, while it's provided great material comfort to us, it now has the risk of destroying us.
Yeah.
Ways that we never probably considered before. I mean, whether you're talking about from weapons to environmental challenges to, economic systems, they're all regulated by technology, which we've now become somewhat dependent on, and is in some ways hurting our planet, because if it's not regulated with wisdom and understanding the bigger order to things. And it's and as a result of this, it's leading to all kinds of other problems in the world. I mean, and when you see like the problems of like the protesting and the rioting that are going on right now in the United States and in other parts of the world too. I mean, here in the United States, it's manifesting as a race issue, but really at the root of it is it's an economic issue, and it's people trying to control the money, right? And the same goes with in other places like China and Lebanon and Egypt and
right.
all these other places where there's in Greece,
inequality.
It's economic, right? Right.
Yeah.
So we're in a time right now of great shift where we're being forced to reflect on how our actions are affecting everything else, right? And we're in a time where our borders are getting strained, right? Where cultures are colliding, and where people have been conditioned to think a particular way are coming in contact with other people that have been conditioned to think different ways.
Right.
And all of this is colliding right now.
Yes.
One of the benefits that we have as Masons is that we are in a system that from the very beginning teaches, gives you tools to navigate great change and in conflict like this. Even if the world were to, God forbid, sink like Atlantis tomorrow, we Freemasons are taught the building blocks for rebuilding civilization, right? To be able to rebuild civilization with order, right? It's there. It's encoded in our ritual. It's encoded in our memory work. And the symbols that most cultures fight against each other over, in Masonry, we're taught to be united with them.
Yeah.
Right?
Them all.
Right. So whereas in the profane world, you may have a Jew and a Muslim, fighting each other over who's, representing these doctrines better, right? And so they're literally fighting. Yes. In a Masonic lodge, the Jew and the Muslim are able to pray together around the same altar, right? In peace and be brothers. So it's a model for peace that's needed in the world right now. And
Absolutely.
so Masons have the tools, they're taught the symbolism, they're taught the tradition, and they have the keys for building stable civilization. But it falls upon each Master Mason to be able to step it up and make that happen. And right now, that's needed in the world more now than ever before. So
Absolutely.
it really does be examples in the world, be leaders in the world, be master masons in the world, where they're creating new new ways for people to relate to each other,
That's it.
where they're
You have to
able
be
to
diplomats.
work together. They're diplomats, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're a master mason, you're a true creator, you're a true builder, you're an architect for this
Right. You're building,
social.
you're putting things together in the world in an orderly way, but with the brotherly love to hold it all together. So it's that
That's right.
diplomacy of being balanced, of seeing both sides, and giving
Yeah,
everyone respect. And you know, hopefully as Masons we can help to bring harmony into the world. But I think I agree with you that times like this is when we're really needed the most,
yeah,
to be a positive force.
yeah. That's right. And you know, I mean, we masonry uses religious symbols, but we don't mason Jun. You know, it's, I mean, some would argue, you know, the only definition of religion in the Bible, but the only the only place in the Bible where it says religion is, it
Mm-hmm.
says religion is protecting the widow and the orphan. That's what it says, which is of course what masonry does, you know.
Right,
But
right, 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 right.
that aside, you know, masonry is not a religion.
Yes.
We welcome in brothers of all different religions, but
Right.
we're able to use religious symbol in a way that unite all people. I mean, like you'll find a cross in masonry, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but it's not used as strictly a Christian symbol. It's used as a symbol that unites all people. Or you'll find the shield of David, the Solomon seal, you know, in masonry. But it's,
Yeah.
again, it's
Yeah.
used in its higher esoteric
Right.
concept that unites people, you know. And
Exactly.
or
Exactly.
you'll find Islamic symbolism or Druze, you know. In the early started out talking about the Druze in the original 25th degree of the Scottish Rite. It was a Druze degree. It was a degree about the Druze. It took place with the Druze. Now, in recent years, um, it got turned into a Sufi degree,
Mm-hmm.
which is, you know, fine. But it originally started out as a Druze degree. But you know, it's not put in there to tell people they have to become Muslim. It's put in there to say, hey, here's the higher meanings behind these symbols and these traditions, and that we can all understand to unite us all.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to take that on, and we have to be responsible with that, you know. I mean, in the world, because the world is you know, if it keeps growing and keeps populating the way it is, it's and with the internet, where
Yeah.
you can talk with somebody on the other side of the world instant, we're becoming more and more a world community. And the cultural conditioning that, or in other words, the brainwashing that
Yeah.
each culture has received, where
Right.
people have been told this is who you are, is now conflicting with other people's version of this is who you are.
Yes.
And so we have to merge into a new way of thinking, where we can take the ideas from both cultures and put them in a melting pot, if
Sure.
you will.
Right.
And this is, of course, meant, but it's on a microcosm, but it's happening on a world level. And as Masons, this is something
Mm.
we've always done. We've always brought in, I mean, if you go to that, I talked about the little Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul, where the Templars, that was their headquarters. There's a crypt underneath that that church, that mosque, that it's an old Templar crypt that's underneath it, and in it is Christian, Jewish, and Muslim Templars.
That's right.
That are buried together.
Mm-hmm.
They're all buried together,
which was very unusual in that time.
It's still unusual today. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So the fact that the Templars were doing that
was huge.
Huge, and it's still there. It's still there, and that is an idea that we find within Masonry too.
That's
you know,
right.
I mean, this is why you go to the Masonic section of a cemetery today, you'll find Jewish Masons, Christian Masons, Muslim Masons, Hindu Masons, you know, all buried together. You know, they're just recognizing each other as brothers, you know, and that is a model that our world has got to start to adapt. Otherwise, we're going to destroy ourselves. Absolutely. And as Masons, we have to be the ambassadors of that, for sure.
Perfect. Wow. So,
in my opinion,
it's great. Yeah. So I think we did it, man. 2.5 hours. This was fabulous. I thank you so much, Brother Hogan, for coming on the show. And I know if I lived near you, I'd want to hang out with you all the time. Go get coffee. Let's go get a beer, because I think we share a passion for all this stuff. And I feel a connection. We're probably in the same age group. How old are you?
Well, I'm 45.
Okay. So I'm 47. So, you know, we are in the same age group.
I'm actually about to turn 46 in like a few weeks. So, you know,
we're about the same.
Yeah.
So we have that connection, but yeah, no, thank you so much. I know I took a lot of your morning, and I hope you enjoyed it.
That was great.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for putting these on. I mean, it's a great service to brethren all over the place. And yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing. And thanks for having me on this with you. It's been great chatting with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, Tim. So we'll do it again though, because I have a feeling we have a few more things to talk about.
Great. Anytime. I'd love to do it.
All right, man. Have a good one. Peace.
You too. Take care.
All right.
Bye.